So good morning, Irresistible. All of you brave people, the second Snowmageddon in 1 week, and you're here anyway. My goodness. All right. Do me a quick favor. Just check in on your Facebook page. Let people know where you're at. We've been doing that again for a little bit, and it seems to be working. Had a lot of new people like the Irresistible Facebook page, which is kind of nice. And to those of you who are watching on YouTube, it is an honor to have you guys with us also. Just in case nobody knows, I'm Les Farley, and my wife Grace and I are the founding and senior pastors of this place. And real quick, all of you guys here know, I think, all you guys know that they're on the screen behind me is going to be a lot of notes. There's going to be a lot of scripture. And those just help, I hope, support the message as we go through it. Those of you that are online, you can't see the screen, but you can also get those notes and scriptures by going to the Bible app, searching for us by Irresistible Church, or you could go to our Facebook page and like it, and then click the link that I didn't put on this morning. I forgot. So I was fighting snow and a dog today, so it's still going to be on there. You're just going to have to search in the events section, and you're going to have to look for Irresistible Church and use today's date, January, if you can believe, the middle of January already, January the 14th, 2024. So, working our way through an opening series that I call Money Talks. It is about God's financial system that was put in place a long time before Jewish law, but it was put in place so that you would be prosperous and you would be able to carry the gospel throughout all the world. Last week, we looked at the first of four types of giving, and we covered the tithe, I think, fairly decently, with the exception of one thing that I always seem to forget, but the one piece that I want you to get today is that when you're talking about a tithe, in your financial empire, the principle of tithing sets up every other type of giving for success. Now, you might think that's weird because we're dealing with God, but God puts a series of returns for the different types of giving that you can do. And if you don't tithe, you could still do those other types of giving, but you're essentially just throwing your money away because there's no guarantee of protection. We covered all that last week. You'll have to get back into last week's message. And the one question I forgot again, and I'm going to have to change my notes so that it doesn't happen again, but I got asked again online, am I supposed to, am I intended to, do I tithe off of my net income or my gross income? I asked that question many, many years ago, and one really neat financial advisor just showed me how and looked at my pay stub and said, basically, which of these numbers on this pay stub represent your actual pay? Before you take deductions out, before you have retirements, before you have medical, which of those numbers is what you actually get paid? I told him, and he said, that's the number you tithe off of, because that's your legitimate amount. Regardless of any theft that happens from extra taxes, any type of returns, any type of retirements, any type of health, you tithe on everything you make. And what that does then is everything that you take out of that, your retirements are already covered because you already tithed off of it. All of the medical things that you may have to have done are covered because you've tithed off of that. It's an interesting process if you just keep going into it and studying it. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense, and you're watching again this week for that question. This week, the second thing that we're going to cover in this financial empire is what the heck is an alms? Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up in the hills of eastern Ohio and southeastern Ohio, and I guess it was the western part of southeastern Ohio, if I look at the map correctly. Anyhow, it's the foothills of the Appalachians. And they know I moved away when I say Appalachians. It's the foothills of the Appalach. And one of the things that you always would hear old people talking about, now I know how old I am, and I could still remember people that were older than me back in those days, and they were talking about giving alms when they went to church. And I always thought that was the funniest word. Looked it up, found out what it meant in Webster's dictionary. But alms is very simply deals with something that you can see. You can tell when someone is in need, either by looking at them, by listening to them, by seeing some of the things that they're going through. And the biggest thing that I can tell you about God when he put all this in play, regardless of whether or not you've accepted Jesus, I believe there is a a segment or a piece of compassion that's just hardwired into every human being. And when we see someone in need, we want to do something, typically, until we get old and cynical. But we want to try to help. And if you read through Luke chapter 10 and you see Jesus' teaching about the Good Shepherd, or the Good Samaritan, he actually said that it's a human being's responsibility to help people in need. Now, this is before he ascended. And he's saying then, you see someone in need, you should be helping them as much as you can. So simply put, alms equals giving to those in need. And that's really all that word means. So when you see someone in need, and here's the other piece of that, it doesn't have to be through the church. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. You can see someone in need, and I would caution you. We have all seen the different people that are standing on the corners of the roads and stuff, and you've noticed that they've all moved out of town because town won't let them do it anymore. But those people, by and large, you're going to have to be very, very cautious, because I know a couple of them that live in better houses than I do, and they make more money standing on that corner than they do working. And they'll tell you that if you stop and talk to them. So just be cautious. But if you know somebody in church, somebody in your family, somebody that you're friends with, and you know that there's a need there, the biggest thing that you can do, if at all possible, is to help them. Sometimes that's prayer. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's food. But helping is helping, right? When somebody needs help, they need help. What's most not understood, or the thing that's not understood by most of the church world, is the return that God promises when you do that. When you help someone who's legitimately in need, he promises something to you. So Proverbs 19, verse 17 says, if you help the poor, you're lending to the Lord, and he will repay you. He will repay you. So when you help somebody, God's keeping track of it, and he says, I'm giving that back to you because you gave it out of their need. And if you take that by itself, you think, well, that's a no-lose situation. If God's going to give it back to me, then I can give whatever I have to give, and God's on the hook. God's the one that's got to do it. Whatever we give is given back dollar for dollar. But where we give becomes vitally important. When you look at, again, there are people that make a living out of begging, and that was true in Jesus' time. It's true now. It will probably be true when Jesus comes again. There are going to be people that do that, and they just get very accustomed to it. And over the years, here's the part for you church people, and I'll talk to you guys too because you're on the camera. But for church people, the biggest mistake that I have seen in 40-some years of being saved and being a pastor is that I've had people talk to me over the years and say, I'm going to take part of my tithe and I'm going to give it to my family because I've got someone in need. I need to help them, so I'm going to not tithe 10% to the church. I'm going to tithe 5 and give the other 5% to my family. And that sounds all well and good, doesn't it? Sounds great. But the tithe, you have to remember, is set apart. We learned it last week. It's set apart for the working of the church. It's set apart so that things can happen here, things that can go into the community, other things that can happen for not only you but other people around. And that 10% tithe to the church is your key to keeping the blessing windows open and keeping what you have protected. And if you don't tithe that whole thing, then all of a sudden, you're not protected. Blessing doesn't happen quite like it should or like it was. So giving to the poor is a great thing, but if it comes at the expense of your tithe, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're setting yourself up to not see the promised blessing, to not see the protection, and you can't blame God because God's not the one that did it. And I've had a couple of people tell me, well, God told me to do this. Then he just rewrote the entire book for you. Bless your heart. He must love you. If all you do is give alms to the poor, Proverbs 19:17 promises you to return you to where you was. There's no getting rich off of giving to the poor. God just says, I'm going to give you back what you gave. So you're right back where you were. But if you give to the poor out of your tithe, now the protection's not there. So God's going to still give it back. He's going to keep his word. But then you don't have protection. And the enemy has full reign to attack everything that he just gave you back. And I don't know if you carry this through long enough, you're going to figure out that there's going to come a place, going to come a time where if you continue to have things stolen from you because you're taking your tithe, Malachi said stealing the tithe and giving it somewhere else, you're going to be to the point where you don't have enough money to give to the poor, to help the poor. And I've seen that work out in the lives of friends of mine, and it took them years. One guy took decades before he finally got back a hold of me and said, now I see what you were talking about. I mean, he lost his family, he lost his job, he lost almost everything. And he's still in the process of recovering. But, buddy, I'll tell you what, you do not talk to that guy about taking your tithe and giving it for any other reason other than tithing to the church that God's called you to. Does it make sense that if you're walking in God's blessing and that God's the one on the hook for protecting what you own, does it make sense that you're in a much better place to give to the poor than if you're poor already yourself? And there's no shame in being poor. We've been poor. I was raised poor. I didn't know how poor we were till the first time I went to one of my friends' houses, and I thought, whoa, you don't, never seen a house with a basement. Ours all had wheels so we could move. Oh, I'm being honest with you. The more blessed you have, the more you have to give to the poor. And the more, as long as you keep that tithe in place, that blessing is just going to continue, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. So honestly, the best thing that, from what I can see from all the study I've done, the best way you can help the poor is for you to not be poor. Now, poor people will give you more than rich people will a lot of times. They don't have as much to give, but they're very, very well aware most of the time. If they're truly, truly impoverished people, they will give you the shirt off their back. But your job is to continue to be blessed by God and then take what he tells you over and above that tithe and help who he tells you to help. And again, I told you it doesn't have to be through the church. It can be. But it can be just someone that I mean, we've had many times we've walked into the mall back when there was a mall, and God would talk to Grace and just say, well, buy this guy a meal. And we'd seen the guy around town, and we knew that he was actually homeless, and we'd buy him a meal, and he was very appreciative. But you get someone like that, and they're not really poor, and you offer to buy them the meal, they'll tell you, I just like the cash. One final thought. This is a quick one. I know that everybody's got to go out and play in the snow. So one final thought. You remember what our first and foremost command is? To love the one another's around us, yes? At the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2, you can read that love doesn't ignore someone in need. Remember all the people that got together and sold what they had to sell. There's the key to that. They didn't sell everything. They sold everything they had to sell. And they gave the money to the apostles, and the apostles distributed to make sure that people were taken care of. Some of it was food, some of them I'm sure was clothing. We're not told. But they took care of all the people that were in need. And here's the thing that Jesus talked about. He talked about this a long time before the church was formed. But love gives. If you're going to love the one another's around you, you're going to have to give. I'm not saying money. I'm not saying it's going to be buying them a meal. But love always gives. Could be time. Could be prayer. But love always gives the right way. When you give, Jesus was very, very blunt about how you should give. I'm going to read 4 verses out of Matthew chapter 6. And some of the emphasis on the syllables I put in here, but the rest of them are just there already. But Matthew 6 verse 1 says, watch out! Now if God's telling you to watch out, what do you suppose you should do? You best be ducking. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. Now, what reward is he talking about? Proverbs 19:17. God doesn't have to repay you when you do it to showboat. Verse 2, when you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. And I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they're ever going to get. So when I talk with people a lot, and I've talked with pastors a lot, and they've talked about all the number of people that we've helped, the number of things that we've done, and there was this one guy, and they go through this whole, I always look at them and I say, how does that correspond to Matthew chapter 6? How are you not bragging to me about how much you can give? Because we don't have the finances in this church that you have in your church, so now I feel bad because I can't give as much as you. And he kind of looked at me and he didn't understand. He got all the reward he was going to get because he blew his own horn. Verse 3, but when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Well, that's easy for me. And verse 4, give your gifts in private. Here's the key. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. So why in private? Why is Jesus so big on this thing about how you give? You give in secret to protect people's dignity in their crisis. If you've ever truly been in need, you know how humbling it is to do some of the things that you have to do in order to keep your family together and keep them fed and keep things going. But God, through Jesus, is telling us that one of the most important things to God is that those people's dignity be intact after they have given to. And it is a humbling thing for people to give you things. And we've had it done many times in our early years. I've told you the story years and years ago that for the first, 3, 4 years after we moved and I was saved and I was trying to find the right job and get trained and do all the things, there were times that we had $25 a week for groceries for 5 people. And none of us starved to death. There was always enough, but there were always people bringing things. There was people that would come to the door. Doorbell would ring. Kids would go running and scurrying and trying to find out what's going on. We'd open the door and there'd be a bag of groceries there. Nobody around, no cars in the parking lot, nothing, just groceries there. And we tried to always make sure that we repay that. We pay that forward all the time whenever we find out it needs to be done. But God, let's put it this way. If you've ever been really in need, you know the last thing you feel is dignified. And if you've ever stood in line for food stamps or for any of the other assistance that's available through the government, that is the last place that you'll find dignity. And we've been there in a number of situations, a number of times. We always worked our way out of it. We always gave our way out of it. Whatever money we had, we made sure we tithed. And if we didn't tithe, we just gave it all. There were times we'd find a dollar bill. Well, we didn't go get change. We just gave the whole dollar bill in an offering for a tithe to the church. People, a lot of times when you look at them, when they're in desperate need, you can tell from the look on their face and the set of their shoulders that they have lost their dignity. And that's a terrible place to be. I've been there. And I've had friends who pulled us up out of that just by teaching us this and giving us this. And it's something that we as followers of Jesus, we should never do anything to make a person's loss of dignity any worse than what it already is, because it's bad enough. We should obey the words of Jesus. Consider your ways. Give, but give to help. Don't give just so you can brag to somebody that you did it. As a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't even say a word about what you did and how you did it. So here's my final thought. I have found nowhere in the gospel account where Jesus complained to the person that was sick about being sick, or complained to the person who was in need about being in need. Jesus just took it as it was and did what needed to be done. So I guess the best thing I could say is that whenever you're giving to someone in need, don't give them the riot act about what they need to do to not be in need. Just help if the Lord told you to. Let God work with them. Your witness in that giving will probably mean more than all of your opinions. Keep your opinions and your speechifying to yourself. So basically that's it. Nice, quick, nice, short. I knew this one always bothers people for some reason, but we're going to do it nice and short because the wind's still blowing and you can still get out and play in the snow and track as much of it in the house as possible. You should give to the poor. This is what we've learned so far. You should give to the poor, but never at the expense of your tithe. Number one, tithing is 10%, period. That's all there is to it. Tithing guarantees that you have a position under God's open window of blessing. It protects what you have from being taken from you by the enemy. Giving begins at 11%. But when it comes to giving to those in need, God repays dollar for dollar anything that you give to them. And one of the biggest things that we can do, the best thing that we can do, is protect the recipient's dignity. Keep your opinions to yourself and just give what God said to give. It's as simple as that. You always have to do what God says. Now, I will tell you, it's probably, I don't know how it comes across on the camera, but it does not. Usually, once I get to this point, this is the message. I put it second so that you'll have time to forget it by the time we get to the last message, because this is a tough one. Because all of us, again, know people that are in need. And there are many, many times, and the key that you have to do is follow what God tells you to do. Don't just give to somebody because I preached on giving. If God doesn't tell you to give, then don't give. But when he tells you to give, say, yes, sir, how much? And do what he says. And make sure that you do it in line with what Jesus taught. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. There are a lot of people that think that, you know, we preach on money just so that we can be rich. You know, I'm already richer than I ever have reason to be, because God's given me a loving wife, a family, grandchildren, given me a church that for some reason puts up with me. The biggest thing that I can tell you right now is I am sweating like a pig because I turned the heat up for all you ladies, and it's hot up here. My desire for you is to all of you to walk spiritually, 10 feet tall and bulletproof in all your finances, your health, your businesses, your families. You know, there are a lot of attacks going on with families and things now, and we need to keep each other in prayer, make sure that we are going into that extra piece of time in prayer. Make sure that we're protecting everybody. Make sure that everybody, their bodies, their minds, their souls, finances, everything about everybody in here, you should be praying about, just because this is your family. This is it. So, you guys out there, you want to join us? It is 159 Frederick Street in Lexington, Ohio. I think you can plug it into almost any mapping software. Next week, it should be a little bit more fun because we're going to talk about fun stuff, unless you think about what I'm going to be talking about. It's called The Truth About First Fruits. This is something that people have got so messed up. And I'm going to tell you the truth. I've been telling it for years. I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It has nothing to do with giving your whole paycheck, the first paycheck of the year, to a televangelist somewhere in Houston. I will see you later. I'm going to give you to my grace.
I'm still on. Hi. How do you follow that up? Hey, thanks for joining us. Again, keep those prayer requests coming, and we are happy to pray with you, pray for you. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.